She broke her vow to save her people. Dies Q. That is the center of everything. Not the magic, not the twin dragons, not the wars that came. Dies Q after and the role she played in them. The center is one moment. A woman who had built her entire life around the principle that harm was never the answer, standing in front of soldiers who were going to kill everyone she had ever loved, and making a choice that contradicted every value she had ever held. She made it anyway. Killy Tinter, her name is Karma. And what she discovered in that moment, about herself, about the limits of belief, about what it costs to survive with your principles partially intact, is the story that no one in Ionia has finished telling yet. New here? Subscribe. Every week, a League of Legends story told the way it deserves to be heard. The village she came from was small enough that the rest of Ionia barely registered its existence. Ain, in the deepest part of the province that would later be called the place where the Noxian advance finally faltered, ran on a set of values so internally consistent that outsiders who encountered them sometimes mistook them for naivete. A council of elder monks, a community of people who practice beneficial magic, healing, mediation, the particular craft of building, communication between the living world and the spirit realm that Ionia cultivated more carefully than any other region. A commitment to nonviolence so thorough it was not a rule, but a condition of identity. They were not pacifists because they had calculated that pacifism was strategically optimal. They were pacifists because they had understood, through generations of practice, that harm begat harm, and that the chain had to be broken somewhere, or it would not be broken at all. Karma lived inside this understanding the way she breathed, without effort, without question, as the basic condition of what she was. She was known across the region as a mediator, not as someone who split the difference between competing interests, which is the lesser version of the skill, but as someone who could find the actual point of contact between two things in conflict and hold it still long enough for both sides to see it. She was good at this because she listened with the specific quality of attention that makes people feel genuinely heard rather than merely processed. She was fair in a way that had nothing to do with rules and everything to do with her particular capacity to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously without any of them collapsing into the others. The spirits respected her. This is not a small thing in Ionia, where the relationship between the living and the ancestral is one of the primary organizing principles of culture. The spirits respect very few people. They respected Karma. The elders had a word for what she was becoming, someone who embodied the principles that all Ain aspired to, who made the abstract concrete by existing. She did not seek this status. She wore it the way a river wears its banks, shaped by it, but also shaping it back. Then Noxus arrived. Here is the thing about Noxian military strategy that Ionia, at the beginning of the invasion, consistently failed to account for. It was not brutal because it was disorganized. It was brutal because it was deliberate. The violence was a message. The message was, resistance has a cost that you will not be willing to pay. Most civilizations, when they understood the message clearly enough, made the calculation the message was designed to produce. They accommodated, they negotiated, they folded. The elder monks of Ain looked at the approaching army and made their decision. Akaimechlein Mefaki, they would meet the Noxian commander at the edge of the village. They would offer dialogue. Belamethaki, they would demonstrate, by the quality of their posture and the openness of their hands, that this community represented no military threat and had no military ambitions. They believed, not naively but as the conclusion of a tradition that had seen many conflicts resolved through exactly this kind of confrontation, that a commander capable of leading an organized army was also capable of recognizing a community that was not worth the cost of subduing. They walked out to meet him. The commander looked at what stood in front of him, old men with open hands and the specific quality of posture that comes from having decided not to fight, and he saw something. he had been trained to interpret in exactly one way: weakness. A message sent by the conquered, before they understood they were being conquered. He killed them in front of the village. Then he gave the order to advance. Karma was in the village when this happened. She saw it. She stood with the rest of her community in the particular silence that follows when something so far outside expectation occurs that the mind has not yet developed the vocabulary to process it. The monks were dead. Philihirasa soldiers were coming. And around her, the people she had grown up with, the people she had mediated disputes for and healed and listened to and loved, were preparing themselves to accept what was coming the only way their values left open to them. They were preparing to die. She could not accept it, not the dying itself. She understood that all things ended and had made her peace with the shape of an ending. What she could not accept was the specific quality of this dying, pointless, preventable, the direct result of a choice made by people who were not part of this community and had no relationship with what they were about to destroy. Her people were going to be erased, not because of anything they had done, but because they were in the path of something that operated on a scale that did not notice them. Something in her that she had not known was there came forward. The will that moved in her in that moment was not rage. This is the detail that every account of what happened next tends to misrepresent. She was not angry. She was not afraid. She was something more total than either, a completeness of intention so extreme, it cleared everything else away. She had spent her entire life learning how to focus the mind until it achieved the quality of stillness that allowed the spirit realm to come through. She had practiced this in meditation, in mediation, in the particular discipline of holding very still while everything around her was in motion. She had never used it like this. She directed everything she had toward a single purpose. Her people will not die here. What came out of her was fire. Not ordinary fire. The twin dragons of Ionian symbolism, the great serpentine shapes that the ancestral spirits of the province had always been associated with in the deepest traditions. They poured from her as if they had been waiting, as if all the discipline and practice and accumulated energy of a lifetime of spiritual work had been building toward exactly this moment, and the moment had finally arrived to release it. They reached the Noxian commander. When it was finished, he was dead. His soldiers, who had been close enough to feel the heat of cruise what they had witnessed, were not. They ran. Not because they were cowards. Noxian soldiers were not cowards by training or by selection. They ran because they had just seen something their training had not prepared them for, and the gap between preparation and reality, when wide enough, overrides everything else. Karma stood in the space left by what she had done. Nyawelid. She had harmed someone. She had used her power, the power she had spent years understanding as a gift for healing and communication, to kill, not by accident, not in reflex, with full intention, with complete focus, because she had decided that this specific harm was the only available alternative to a larger harm. The village was alive. The elders were dead. The Noxians were gone. She had saved her people and violated every principle she had organized herself around in the same moment with the same act. That is not a contradiction that resolves cleanly. She knew this. Immediately, she would know it for the rest of her life. This is the moment that defines everything that comes after. Not the power, not the victory, but the specific understanding she arrived at standing in the silence of a village that was still there, because she had decided that some principles have conditions, that the chain of harm has to be broken somewhere, that breaking it sometimes requires becoming part of it, briefly, in a way that you will not be able to undo. She became one of Ionia's leaders as the war continued. Atari nach Tresasa. This was not a role she sought. It was a role that found her, the way these roles always find the people who are most capable of filling them, rather than the people who most want to fill them. She had power. She had moral authority, not despite what she had done, but in the specific way. Ionian culture processed these things because of it. She had demonstrated that she could make an impossible choice and remain recognizably herself afterward. That was the quality a war needed in its leaders. She fought. She healed. She held the line in the specific way that someone holds a line who understands what the line is actually protecting. Not territory, not pride, but the particular quality of a culture that would not survive being absorbed into an empire that had no category for it. When the Noxian forces were finally driven from Ionian shores, the war did not end. What ended was the external threat. What replaced it was the internal fracture that wars leave behind when the threat that unified people is no longer present. Ionia split along a fault line that had always been there and had been held closed by necessity. The warriors who had found in the conflict something they did not want to give up. Purpose, strength, a reason to keep fighting. Versus the monks and scholars who wanted to return to what Ionia had been before any of this happened. Both positions were legitimate. Both positions were incomplete. Khantaim. Karma saw a third path. Tipu Chai. Not between them exactly. Through them. A synthesis that acknowledged what the war had. Revealed that Ionia had capacities it had not previously had access to. That the strength, discovered in extremity, was real and worth keeping, while insisting that the principles the monks had died for were not merely traditional, but true. That nonviolence was not weakness. That the goal of all this strength was eventually a world where it did not need to be used. She is still working toward that world. She carries what happened in that village with her, not as shame exactly, but as knowledge. The knowledge of what she is capable of. The knowledge of the conditions under which her principles have edges. The knowledge that the third path she is trying to build is not a path that has ever been built before, which means there are no maps, which means every step is a kind of FIRST step. She walks it anyway. She has always been better at finding ways through than most people believed possible. If this story reached you, subscribe. Every week, the full lore of a League of Legends champion, list you, told the way it was meant to be heard.